Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. This is episode 27, entitled You Down with O.P.P? Why Revolutionizing Blockchain Security Will Help Keep Others from Coveting and Stealing Your Property. This podcast is a compilation of 4 episodes, clips from 4 episodes. 2 from season 6, 1 from season 7, and 1 from season 8. The first podcast, I interviewed Hexens. I actually interviewed 2 people with Hexens in October 2023. The first person is in the same podcast is Konstantin Andriotis, who's the chief operating officer. And then also Eliis Norman, who is the chief revenue officer. During this conversation, we spoke about quite a few things, but basically, when does the bull run is the question that was posed in that interview. And it's about how crypto and blockchain security insights they shared for the upcoming bull market, which was back in October 2023, which we thought would be a bull market in 2024, 2025. And that has not quite happened yet, but we're looking forward to that interview, that occurrence, and a lot of what they shared rings true still. And that was from season 6. The next guest, also from season 6, is the co-founder of Elusiv. His name is Julian Deschler. We spoke in September 2023, and we had an amazing conversation about creating a universal Web3 privacy encryption layer to secure the decentralized world. The next podcast from season 8 was exploring the benefits of revolutionizing blockchain security measures that protect us from key exploits. That conversation was with the very beginning of season 8, when I was still doing only audio, with Riad, Wahby, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cubist. And last but not least, season 7, to round things off, an amazing conversation with Dan Hughes, who is the founder of Radix DLT. We spoke about how creating a robust economic security helps to fend off even the strongest adversaries and the weakest protocol security infrastructures. Dan Hughes was my 14th episode in a subset of Crypto Hipster podcasts entitled Crypto Hipster Presents Shooting from the Hip, which was, these podcasts are a little bit longer than others and not prescripted. Actually, the questions didn't even make it their way to the guests for that. It was all shooting from the hip. It was all ad hoc, and there was amazing conversations. So make sure you check out that subset. Make sure you check out this one. My podcasts are available on Spotify. Really, anywhere that you listen to your favorite podcast, you can find the Crypto Hipster podcast. Again, this is the 27th episode of the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls, entitled You Down with O.P.P? Why Revolutionizing Blockchain Security Will Help Keep Others from Coveting and Stealing Your Property. Sit back, listen, enjoy, and check out the full podcast on each of these or any of these. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
I see that. But there are underlying systemic political risks, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what are some of those we need to watch for and how they develop over this next year?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about just macroeconomically, obviously we've got proxy wars going on all over the world right now, everything going on in, Israel, everything that's going on in Ukraine, not to mention runaway inflation, all of the different types of things that are going on in tandem, right? So at the end of the day, I think the ultimate point that Costa was trying to kind of echo is that diversification is it's a tool and it's a strategy, and it needs to be implemented. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket in any type of environment, be it a bull market or a bear market.
Yeah, that's right. And like a small addition about the future, like next couple of years, what's gonna take. So I really believe that next bull run will not be fully in a DeFi space. For me, it seems like that CK rollups or other rollups or other emerging technologies will bring new real world usage cases to the market in terms of, like, once again, data usage, computation, or other purposes we cannot imagine right now. So, and this trend is already taking place. Traditional companies with like a huge century-long history in different industries are trying to get a competitive advantage by simplifying their operations with low cost, easy to use solutions on chain. And if we're talking about industries, it's healthcare, like that, data processing, fintech, and more industries to come. So answering the question about the future, I'm eager to see either, but I see Bitcoin as a future stable digital investing asset, and the Ethereum ecosystem as a data in finance instrument rather than just like a investment thing, you know?
Yeah, I see Bitcoin as money and Ethereum as technology. That's that makes it simplistic for me to understand, right? Um, but you did say, the bull, in order to have the bull run, you have those three things. But we also said that there are bottlenecks, right? There are bottlenecks for mass adoption, right? So how are we going to break through those current bottlenecks? And is breaking through those bottlenecks an absolute necessity?
Can you speak to a little bit more of some of the bottlenecks you might want us to kind of unpack, for an example?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you said the Web3 security is mostly a bottleneck, but there are some other ones like political risk, obviously. But there are some further, bottlenecks for mass adoption. I don't know what they are yet, so I'm asking what you think they are, and if overcoming those barriers are necessary.
I think
Yeah.
I'll take this one just for a second, Konstantin. So I think that we in Web3 have a few different challenges in front of us if we're talking about actual mass adoption of the technology. The first and foremost being the, let's call it, steep learning curve of terminology, verbiage, coding language, and everything else. Until the tech is deeply, let's call it, usable across the most popular programming languages, you're not going to see mass adoption on a developer front, A. Then B, if we're looking at the things that are getting built in Web3 right now, you're seeing a lot of the same things being built over and over and over and over and over again, right? How many Uniswap forks do we really need? Okay. At the end of the day, what will really drive mass adoption is getting the verbiage uncouched in all of this Web3 terminology and making it more appealing to the masses, number one. Number two, finding actual use cases that blockchain supports on an enterprise level that actually generate revenue, right? That's the actual underlying point of all of this, is actual business going on, right? So until we see things getting built that have an actual use case that businesses can take to the market, you're not going to see, quote, mass adoption at the end of the day.
And all of DeFi, and push the entire Web3 space forward to deliver on core values of self-sovereignty and data ownership. I want to find out how that privacy can enable self-sovereignty, and then what some of the dangers are in that process of making things private.
I guess so. Some of the issues by making things private is that also illicit actors can profit from this, right? And we've seen that, like, obviously in the past with Tornado Cash, where, for example, Lazarus Group used Tornado Cash to launder money, hide its traces, and that's kind of like the problem in a decentralized setting with financial transactions being private. Therefore, we kind of thought, so we want to provide privacy for honest users, and we want to have compliance to keep the bad guys out, so to say. But we want to do that in like a self regulatory approach, where we have a decentralized system that can basically detect illicit actors, and that's where Elusiv Zeus comes into play. So basically Zeus stands for zero knowledge encrypted user safeguarding. And yeah, basically our thought was that previous approaches to compliant privacy were either ineffective, like deposit screenings, for example, or fully centralized, just rendering them unsuitable for decentralized systems. And with Elusiv Zeus, we basically invented a solution for this. So basically, users encrypt their transactions in a way that Zeus can perform confidential checks on past transactions, and Zeus can then trace and reveal illicit financial activity, allowing for decentralized self-regulation and regulatory compliance. And it basically works through like a consensus mechanism. So it's basically you have the Elusiv nodes, basically like a network of nodes, and you basically need to reach consensus on illicit activity. So it's not just one person basically that can say this was like some illicit interaction. So it's really like a decentralized system, and through governance, you can basically then keep the illicit actors out, because I guess that most of the users don't want to pool their funds together with illicit actors, and therefore like even helping them by increasing their anonymity set. But privacy should be at the same time be a human right, so that everyone has access to privacy preserving technologies. And as long as you don't like hack any protocols, which is bad for the whole ecosystem, and try to hide your traces, your privacy is preserved.
So in addition to my story, there have been a few events, right, that have led up to the increased Web3 security measures compared to a few years ago, right? I'm thinking the first event was FTX, right? And then there were others, like you mentioned, Ledger, right? What were some of the key events, that led up to the security measures?
So I think one that we've seen is one like trend that we've seen is that I'd say we can kind of separate these into two categories. One is like kind of squarely computer security, like did somebody break into my machine effectively and steal my stuff, right? And the other one is kind of like, how do I know who I'm dealing with? Like it could be that like I'm no one's stealing my keys, no one's stealing my tokens, but the tokens are themselves a scam, right? Like, so that one kind of tends to sound more like the FTX situation. And I think these actually end up being kind of a little bit different in how we deal with them, right? So like rugs and stuff like this, I mean, fundamentally in the sort of decentralized Web3 universe, the best we have really is sort of reputation, right? If I know that somebody is has a good reputation, if I can make sure that they're interacting with safe tokens or whatever it is, like that gives me a higher level of assurance, right? And by the way, it's not perfect, of course, because like FTX had a great reputation, right? So it's always possible for good people to turn bad, or for bad people to have been hiding out in good clothes for a long time. But that sort of thing, I mean, there's not a lot of technical measures to take there other than making sure that people have access to that information. So you can think about this as building up like an information infrastructure where it should be easy for a new person in the space to come in and just figure out, like, you know what, this token's probably a scam. This token's not. Because like the last thing we want is new retail user comes in, first experience that they have is I got scammed for, you know, $100, right? And it's like, okay, for a lot of people, that $100 isn't going to be make or break. For some people, it will be, but for a lot of people, like, okay, they risked $100, they lost $100, but it leaves a sour taste in their mouth, right? And that's a person that's going to be resistant next time. That's a person that's sort of hurting the goal of like actually getting real Web3 adoption now. So I think kind of thinking through this information infrastructure to help people figure out what's good, or at least figure out what's bad, is really, really important. And then on the other side, I think we've seen a lot of sort of ad hoc computer security measures that, you know, kind of worked for a while, but you know, the adversary nowadays is very powerful, right? Like, who is it that's actually trying to steal crypto in bulk? Well, what we know is that, you know, there are a bunch of governments that are trying to do this because that's how they, you know, fund whatever illegal weapons programs, right? Well, that's a serious adversary, right? They have government level resources to throw at stealing stuff, right? And probably they're not going to like break into my wallet and steal $100, but they're certainly going to try and like take over a bridge and steal, you know, $500 million, right? So that's the sort of thing where like really understanding like this is actually the risk profile that we face in Web3 is government level adversaries trying to steal money on a grand scale. And like, what do we do against that? So I think we've seen in the past some, you know, some kinds of security measures that were already known to be antiquated, but were kind of good enough, right? So like a classic example of this, I think, you know, last year, I think last year there was, you know, there was a bunch of folks who were using Friendtech, got their wallets drained, and it turned out to be a classic thing, right? It turned out to be the you know, that like SMS resets, like somebody basically hijacks your SIM and then like they're able to receive SMSs and the SMS was being used for authentication. Well, I mean, don't use that. Never, ever, ever use that, right? And so I think, you know, what ended up happening was, well, you know, Friendtech's wallet provider had that as kind of the best option. And so that's what Friendtech went with. And so that's what happened to their users, right? And I think there's a couple different things that happened there. One is this was a case where, you know, as usual, you have to make a decision between, you know, am I going to give my users, you know, a really nice UX, or am I going to kind of bug them and be a pain to get them to use better security? And I think a lot of folks really think that that's kind of this iron trade-off, right? That you can't get both. And I think, unfortunately, what we see is that with a lot of like wallet providers, that's kind of true, right? So like, as I said, like Friendtech's wallet provider, and by the way, I actually, I'm good friends with Henry at Privy. I like him a lot. We were at Stanford at the same time. I know him really well. He's a super sharp guy. I love him a lot. But I think this was you know, this was kind of an unfortunate thing where this was the best option, and so this is what the customer went with, and so the result was that people lost money. And I think as like providers of this kind of service, like we have an obligation to not only like encourage our customers to use the right tech, to use the right approaches, but also we have an obligation to make the user experience when you do so good. Because if we don't, again, this is like person comes in the door, person turns around and leaves again because they come into the crypto space, they see, this is a pain. I got to write down 24 words. I need to go buy a YubiKey or a ledger. Like suddenly, like this isn't for me. I'm gonna go do something else, right? They'll go back to, I don't know, sports betting or something.
So I want to find out, like, say, for example, you know, it doesn't just have to be Solana. It could be Ethereum. It could be Bitcoin. It could be anybody, right?
Yeah.
If the majority of validators in a network are not honest, how can they mislead full nodes into accepting an incorrect state?
So you've got kind of two kinds of attack vectors there, right? Number one is, depending on how those full nodes are verifying the state, then there may not be a double spend as such in the traditional sense, but they can be fooled into accepting a state transition that might have been wrong, right? Now that depends a lot on the implementation of the security, right? If there's a bug there, then they may not verify that state transition correctly, right? That's probably less likely to happen because state machines and the execution models that are used in these systems are deterministic in nature, right? You put the same inputs in, you get the same outputs out. And so that kind of forms a foundation for how state transitions, you know, tokens A going from token A going from, you know, Bob to Carol, for example, right? The deterministic in nature. So if you are going to verify a state transition, then you want to have the inputs that we used, you want to have the outputs that we use, right? Now, if the network is compromised, then you may ask for those inputs and outputs, and you will be sent, right? Because by sending them to you, that might expose either a bad state transition or may expose the intent of some, you know, attack that may be mounted in the near future, right? So your adversary will, you know, try to cover their tracks from certain individuals. And the thing to remember here is that when you're thinking about security, you always ultimately have to think about what's known as a strong adversary, right? And a strong adversary has complete view of the network, can see everything that's going on, is able to isolate people in the network, validators and nodes and clients, isolate them from other parties in the network, you know, so that those parties who have been isolated can be fed one set of information, and then other parties who have been isolated can be fed another set of information. And obviously you don't want those two isolated groups to be able to talk to each other, right? Strong adversaries they essentially have, you know, godlike powers, for want of a better word, right? They can see everything. So if you're dealing with an adversary of that kind of strength, then you can create multiple proofs that may, you know, execution proofs, right? Like in the case of Altus and stuff, yeah. And you can create forged copies of those. You can create those signatures with whatever information you would like to have in them, because ultimately you control the network, right? And you can isolate parties from each other so that they can't see these two conflicting things until it's too late. And the same with a double spend, right? If the network is compromised, then the adversaries can create two completely different versions of history and give those two different versions of history to different people depending on what their attacker's doing. In the case of a double spend, right? They give one version to use Tolly's example, they give one version to Circle, and because they're a strong adversary, they know which of all the nodes in the network are Circles, so they isolate them. From Circle's point of view, everything is fine because I'm receiving transactions, I'm receiving blocks, all the blocks check out, all the signatures check out, all the proofs check out. But everybody else who's not Circle in the network is getting a different version. And they're also all happy because, okay, the blocks check out, the signatures check out, the proofs get out, check out, we're all good. And then whatever the attack is, you know, it happens. The adversaries leave, everybody can see each other again, and it's like oh shoot, we've got a problem here. Circle have got one version, we've got another version, how do we reconcile it? And that's known as a safety break, and they're generally devastating.
Okay. I'm thinking about strong adversaries.
One of the, right, if you're a strong adversary, different types of adversary potentially need different amounts of control in the network, right? So if I'm a weak or medium strength adversary and I have 34% of, say, hash power or stake in the network, then depending on the consensus mechanism that's used, I can cause what's called liveness issues, right? So I can essentially halt the network. Yeah, I can't do safety breaks easily, but I can halt the network, which, you know, isn't great in the first place, right? Because people are trying to make transactions and none of them are going through, they're timing out or whatever, and nothing gets processed. But if if I want to cause safety breaks, but I'm a weak or medium strength adversary, I generally need 67% of, you know, stake or whatever the influence metric is in the network. And I can also then, of course, cause liveness breaks as well.